little germs do.
Amen.
This Honourable House now resume its sitting. Call of the roll.
Mr. Witter, Mr. Samuda, Mr. Holness, Dr. Clark, Mr. Shaw, Dr. Chang, Mr. Montague, Ms. Grange, Mr. Henry, Mr. Bartlett, Mr. Mackenzie, Mr. Chuck, Mr. Darrell Vaz, Mr. Warmington, Mrs. Robinson, Mr. Hutchinson, Dr. Wheatley, Dr. Tufton, Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Malahoo Fort, Mr. Spencer, Mr. Green, Mr. Terrelong, Mr. Main, Mr. R. Scott, Mr. Azan, Dr. Bloomfield, Mr. Brown, Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Buchanan, Mr. Bunting, Dr. Campbell, Mr. Campbell, Mr. Clark, Mrs. Cuthbert Flynn, Miss Daly, Mr. Daly, Mrs. Dalrymple Philibert, Dr. Dunn, Mr. Fagan, Dr. Ferguson, Mr. Golding, Dr. Guy, Miss Hannah, Mr. Hales, Mrs. Holness, Mr. Hilton, Mr. Jackson, Mr. Kellier, Dr. McNeil, Miss Nita, Mr. Paulwell, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Phillips, Mr. Pickersgill, Mr. Redman, Mr. Robertson, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Stewart, Reverend Thwaites, Mr. Dwayne Vaz, Mr. Wright, Mr. Dr. Chang, Dr. Chang, Mr. Bunting, Mr. Dr. Phillips, Mr. Golding, Mr. Robinson, Mrs. Dr. Brownberg, Mr. Wright, Mr. Redman, Mr. Fagan, Mr. Phillips, Dr. Guy. That's it. Mr. Hutchinson. Yeah. I said
Statements by ministers. Mr. Smuda.
Mr. Speaker, the Ministerial portfolio in economic growth and job creation is expected to make a statement. Oh, he's here. But before we call on him, Mr. Speaker, I just want to bring to Parliament's attention the fact that there are 23 reports from committees on the order paper, and those committees have been laid but not taken. And in the case of the PAAC, some 20 reports have been laid in the House, and none have been taken for the last how many months? They have been on the order paper, if you were noticing. They've been there for a long time. And I'm appealing to the Leader of Opposition Business to hold discussions with the member from Western Westmoreland who chairs the PAAC to ensure that these items are removed from the order paper. I also, Mr. Speaker, wish to indicate that I see a number of private members' motions on the order paper, and it is my intention when we return from our break to systematically go through and take as many of the private members' motions as I can in an effort to make sure that the work of Parliament is carried out through the members who table private members' motions in the House. Mr. Speaker, I now ask that you invite the member from Western Portland to make a statement and the Minister without portfolio.
Minister Darrell Vaz.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yes, copies, plenty copies. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Permission to speak from a seat other than my own.
Go ahead.
Mr. Speaker, in light of the present weather situation, extreme heat and drought-like condition in some parishes, I'm taking this opportunity to provide an update to Parliament and the nation on the situation. It is expected that my colleague, Minister of Local Government and Community Development, will also be making a statement in due course in relation to the response. Mr. Speaker, last year, 2017, was one of the wettest years for Jamaica, with significant rainfall events occurring in almost every month of the year. In fact, for all the traditionally wetter months of the year, rainfall total surpassed the 30-year average for the entire island. This trend continued through to January of 2018 with a number of flood events, mainly over northern parishes. The pattern was soon to change, Mr. Speaker. However, because February 28 it started a trend of below average rainfall for the island and continued through to the secondary rainfall season that starts in May, and reports for that month indicate that two parishes, Portland and St. Elizabeth, again received lesser rainfall than their long-term averages. Data for June, Mr. Speaker, is still being analyzed. However, the preliminary data suggests that the drying trend has been maintained for most of the country, and the forecast for the next few months is causing some concern for a few parishes as we navigate the summer season. The Met Office, Mr. Speaker, analyzes the observed wetness for each parish on a monthly basis in order to ascertain whether the island is experiencing drought conditions. During the summer and traditionally drier months of the year, drought conditions are declared when the standard precipitation index indicates values that suggest moderately dry conditions. These conditions could further deteriorate to be considered severely, extremely, or exceptionally dry. Based on the analysis of the data covering the April-May period, surprisingly, the parish of Portland is singled out for special concern, as for the second month running, the index suggests early stages of drought with moderate dryness. So, Speaker, although St. Mary, St. Thomas, and St. Catherine also fell into that category at the end of April. The burst of showers at the start of May was able to reverse that situation in those parishes, leaving Portland to stand alone with increasing dryness as of the end of May. So, Speaker, this is cause for concern primarily for two reasons. One, Portland is well known as the greenest parish by virtue of the vast natural resource of accumulated rainfall received each year. And secondly, Mr. Speaker, northeast parishes, including Portland, are the source of most of the water that serves the corporate area of Kingston and St. Andrew from the Hermitage Dam. Mr. Speaker, forecast for July to September 2018, ranking the parishes across the island by level of dryness as of May 31st, 2018, shows Portland, moderately dry, St. Mary, abnormally dry, St. Catherine, Kingston and St. Andrew, Manchester, St. Elizabeth, St. Anne, Clarendon and St. James, near normal, St. Thomas, abnormally wet, and Trelawney, Hannibal and Westmoreland, moderately wet. Mr. Speaker, these rankings are, however, expected to change over the ensuing months, and based on the precipitation outlook as analyzed by the Metaphysics Climate Predictability Tool, below normal rainfall is expected through to September 2018 for most sections of the island. Should this forecast materialize, Mr. Speaker, conditions in Portland could become more severe. The risk, therefore, for other parishes experiencing drought conditions, or in the case of St. Mary, for drought to re-emerge is high, going into midsummer dry period. The SPI also forecasts severe drying, particularly in Portland, St. Catherine, Clarendon during the months of July to September. Mr. Speaker, the National Water Commission has indicated that the storage levels at Hermitage Dam have been falling gradually over the past few months with the reduction in intake due to lower rainfall and now stands at about 52% of capacity. So, Mr. Speaker, to repeat that, the Hermitage Dam as of now is 52% of capacity. Mona, however, Mr. Speaker, is nearly full. Although they have not yet instituted strict measures to restrict usage by their customers, this will inevitably be required if the forecast for below normal rainfall holds through the summer months. It may be useful to also point out, Mr. Speaker, that the Met Office is also predicting that the summer will be hotter than normal as well. So the dependency on water for cooling and rehydration is going to increase the demand for this essential commodity. It is therefore important, Mr. Speaker, in light of these developments, that we start to make adequate preparations to deal with the forecast for a high chance of warmer than normal temperatures with below normal rainfall, as it is likely that Jamaica could see extremes in the weather for some time. We should also educate ourselves on the best response and best practices to climate change related issues. Against that background, Mr. Speaker, for Portland, we have developed a trucking schedule for the entire parish for the period July to September, and we are seeking funding through the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation, as well as the Ministry of Local Government and Community Development. That is for parish, for Portland. And I'm suggesting, Mr. Speaker, to all my colleague MPs that they do the same and submit that so that it can be looked at through the parish council, so that it can be looked at between the Ministry of Local Government and, of course, the Ministry of Economic Growth, where water is so housed. So, Mr. Speaker, remember you don't have a water problem, obviously. But you're not listening. Oh, okay. Mr. Speaker, I am going to repeat it again. I am suggesting to all of my colleagues that we deal with this matter in a very structured way. And I am suggesting that you work with your parish council, for which the minister, I'm sure, will explain the details, to get a comprehensive water schedule for trucking of water, submitted to the parish council, who will then communicate with their minister, and of course the minister will speak to his colleague minister in the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation. And I am suggesting to you, as I have done in Port and had submitted already, that you do so as quickly as possible, so that at least they will look at what type of demand is there monetary-wise and what you can be allocated, so you know where you are, so that when the trucking is done, there is not an issue for payment to the truckers of the water. So, Mr. Speaker, consideration is now being given to convening the National Drought Committee to give attention to the strategies that may be needed to be employed should the island be forced into a more widespread situation. So I bring this to the House today, Mr. Speaker, to be proactive, and so we can work collectively as Member of Parliament to work together with the relevant ministries and agencies so that we can have in place a mechanism to deal with the water, which is not if, it is when, because we all know already that without a drought, we have many issues and problems on a daily basis in terms of the issue of water in the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Announcements.
Yeah. Mr. Speaker.
Go ahead, Dr. Burns.
Thank you very much. Let me first thank the Minister for bringing the issue to the attention of the members in the Parliament. And it is certainly important, I believe, to be able to count on the data which tells us where we are in terms of the average rainfall, how dry it is, and what are some of the conditions. I note that the Minister did outline in terms of the rankings where we are now. I think it was at May 31st, 2018, showing Portland as being moderately dry, St. Mary abnormally dry, and then there is that big group of near normal that is in the middle. Of course, based on the report itself, if what is predicted remains, any of those could very well become parishes where we have a problem in terms of dryness. So I heard the Minister talking about a suggestion to members of Parliament in terms of putting together a plan that they could submit to the parish council. At face value, it makes sense and it sounds good. My caution, of course, would be so often when we speak in Parliament and individuals hear, for example, of the wonderful work you have done in putting together your plan for $10 million that you have submitted to the parish council, immediately formed in people's mind is that other MPs may very well have up to $10 million to deal with water issues in their parish. And that, of course, would be just a way of setting everybody up. So I think that what needs to be clear is, once you have done the analysis, is what funds are available, so persons are clear on what is available, and the MPs would know what then they would have access to and how they would be able to access that and get that to individuals who would be in need of the water. I also note, as you said, the potential increase in demand for water, and accompanied with all of this is also the increased warming. And I did not hear any mention made of those individuals who really might be vulnerable and that we really have to look out for. And I'm talking about our senior citizens. I'm talking who are going to need to take extraordinary precaution to make sure that they are safe. I'm also talking about our outdoor poor who are going to be out there on the roads exposed to the elements and who are also going to be at heightened risk because of the conditions. So I'd love to see that being part of what we discuss, as you would have intimated in terms of our responses to the issues surrounding climate change. So I think that those are the main issues. In terms of I also want us to be clear that I am certainly aware, as we speak, that even in some of those areas that might not be on the list as being moderately dry, that there are places where there is severe shortage in terms of water currently, who are struggling with having access to water. And therefore, we should, in looking at the plans that individuals, that the MPs are going to send in, or the parish councils, the municipal corporations are going to do, we need to make sure that we are not slavishly looking at that, but that indeed we are looking at some of the realities we face where water is already scarce. Where, given the restrictions by the National Water Commission, for example, there are areas where the pressure is so low, it's turned on in such a short period of time that individuals simply cannot take care of their household chores with the schedule that currently exists. So that also needs to be looked at, because water is life. Water is life. And therefore, we have to make sure that individuals in their homes who may not fall here would also be able to be satisfied in terms of their water consumption needs. Thank you.
Mr. Ascott.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to make a few comments.
All right, go ahead.
Just make a few comments. Well, I'll ask questions. I just want to find out from the Minister if in crafting the Drought Committee, if consideration is given, as written in the statement, to the fact that you have had continuous rain over a 6-month period, and what happens naturally, especially for Portland, what you could be facing is an induced artificial drought, whereby the parish being accustomed to having increased rainfall and then a sudden stop. The plants in the parish at the time would have developed strategies to cope with this high rainfall, and then the sudden stop in the rain would create what you call an artificial shock to the plant. So I'm hoping that your Drought Committee will address this matter. The other point I want to make is as it relates to mitigation, I'd ask that some consideration be given to the watershed areas, because if you notice, it's happening in St. Elizabeth and Portland. It's not by accident, and I'm sure the technical persons will tell you, because based on the high increase and then the sudden decrease, then you will have that factor. So in looking at the long-term mean, I want them to dissect for those two parishes so that we can know what is happening. I just want to make those two comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to say, coming from our parish, that is, every year when there's a drought situation, Clarendon suffers tremendously. And the Minister wanted to echo what my colleague made. The point the colleague made was, we need an idea of the budget, because we have to plan a schedule. It's very important that we get that. But Minister, every time we come here and we produce these short-term programs to try to alleviate the thing, what we are not doing is a long-term preparation. We know that climate change is a reality. We are a victim of climate change, and we need to be more proactive and more aggressive in terms of dealing with the reforestation that will be required. So I suggest that we seriously look at forestry that people won't cut down, because we have many persons, the coal business is a big business now, and people see it as a livelihood. But we need to look at trees that would not be readily cut down by these persons. Also, Minister, the issue of storage. We have been talking about our two storage facility out the Mona Dam and the other one. We need to look as a country at other storage facilities. When we were in government, we did something where we were charging the aquifer out in St. Catherine. I don't know if we can get a report of how successful that is, that we could probably replicate that elsewhere in Jamaica. Thank you.
Just want to find out if there is a program to educate the general citizenry on this situation in respect to it.
Mr. Speaker, just want to find out from the Honourable Minister, not from the Municipal Government, Minister Vaz, as it relates to the Victoria Town water supply scheme. What is the situation? Where are we with that? That is my question to you, sir. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I've taken note of the questions and the comments that have been made, and I will prepare responses. But just to say, Mr. Speaker, that the allocation for the water will be dealt with through the ministry. So the fact is that I have submitted for the parish of Portland what my needs are. And what I'm suggesting is that you do what your needs are, and then you'll be responded to in terms of what is the allocation, and you tweak it accordingly if it is not to the full satisfaction. But start at the situation that takes control of the situation over the next few months. And I'm sure that the ministry will work according to what the drought projections are and allocate the money along that line. And thankfully, Portland so far is the worst affected. So if that remains, then I should get my full allocation. But just to say that it is better for you to craft a schedule and a budget from July to September when back to school starts, so that you cover all the areas, bearing in mind that the rural parishes, some of the water sources have dried up because of the drought. So areas that would normally get water are not going to get water for the next 3 months, so we'll have to truck. So it's in that context that I'm suggesting that you do a comprehensive plan, parish plan, and then submit it so that the government minister responsible and, of course, his colleague can look to see how we can allocate sufficient funds to deal with it. Thank you.
Go ahead,
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
In response to the comments made by the minister, the government last week, Mr. Speaker, the post-cabinet press briefing, I indicated that some $35 million will be made available to be used through selected municipal corporations to the areas that are severely affected. The assessment is being presently undertaken, and I want to assure the House and the opposition spokesperson on local government that the government response will try to cover all the areas of concerns as we collect the information. We are aware, Mr. Speaker, that there are some parishes that will have to get more attention than others. And we have already identified those parishes. So I'd like to advise this Honourable House that by Monday, I will make the necessary announcements and contact the various members of Parliament through the municipal corporations for the execution of the project. I want to also ask members of Parliament to bear in mind that out of their CDF, they can also assist the process. The government is committed to ensure that we respond in a positive way to the existing drought conditions. The point made by the member from North Trelawney, when he spoke about the question of dealing with mitigation in those areas, those are some of the issues that will be deliberated over the next 2 days at the local government conference in Montego Bay, where the opposition spokesperson on local government will be participating. So, member, just to advise you that that forms a part of the core discussion on the question of the drought and the mitigation exercise that needs to be undertaken. The education of the public will come through a number of town hall meetings that is being arranged, not just to speak to the question of the drought conditions, but also to speak to our state of readiness for the upcoming hurricane season.
Announcements.
Laid on the table of the House today are the following: Ministry Paper number 69 of 2018, an annual report and financial statements of the Coconut Industry Board for the year ending December 31, 2016. Ministry Paper number 70 of 2018, entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone Social Intervention. Ministry Paper number 71 of 2018, entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone Social Intervention. Ministry Paper number 72 of 2018, entitled National Policy and Environmental Management Systems for Jamaica. Green Paper number 2 of 2018, entitled Environmental Management Systems. Special report entitled The Underbelly of Human Trafficking in the Jamaican Reality 2018. The annual report on audited financial statements of the Aeronautical Telecommunications Limited for the year 2016-2017. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Airport Authority of Jamaica for the year 2016-2017. 13th annual report of the Contractor General for the year ending 2016. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, order 2018. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, order resolution 2018. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operation, Special Security Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zones, extension of period of operation number 4, order 2018. And the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zones, extension of period of operation number 4, order resolution 2018.
Bills brought from the Senate. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the House, I will move the following 2 motions. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem and environs in the parish of St. James Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, Order Resolution 2018. Whereas Section 4 of the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Prime Minister and Council may, by order, declare any geographically defined area within a single continuous boundary in Jamaica as a zone of special operations for a period not exceeding 60 days if there are reasonable grounds to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence and murder, and the threat to the rule of law and public order, it is necessary so to do. And whereas, in accordance with that section, the Prime Minister in Council made the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone, Order 2017, and whereas that order provides that the said zone shall operate for a period of 60 days, and whereas Section 5 of the Act provides that the Prime Minister in Council, after consultation with the Joint Command, may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the said period for such periods, each not exceeding 60 days. And whereas on the 16th day of July 2018, the Prime Minister and Council made the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zones, extension of period of operation number 4, Order 2018. Now, therefore, be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. This resolution may be cited as the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, Order Resolution 2018, and 2, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, Order 2018, is hereby affirmed. The second resolution, Mr. Speaker, the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, Order Resolution 2018. Whereas Section 4 of the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, hereinafter referred to as the Act, provides that the Prime Minister and Council may, by order, declare any geographically defined area within a continuous boundary in Jamaica as a zone of special operations for a period not exceeding 60 days, if there are reasonable grounds to believe that due to rampant criminality, gang warfare, escalating violence, and murder, and the threat to the rule of law and public order, it is necessary so to do. And whereas in accordance with that section, the Prime Minister and Council made the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures declaration of the Denham Town Community Zone, number 2, Order 2017. And whereas that order provides that the said zone shall operate for a period of 60 days, and whereas Section 5 of the Act provides that the Prime Minister in Council, after consultation with the Joint Command, may, by order, subject to affirmative resolution of the House of Representatives, extend the said period for such periods, each not exceeding 60 days. And whereas on the 16th day of July 2018, the Prime Minister and Council made the law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone extension period of operations number 4, Order 2018. Now therefore be it resolved by this Honourable House as follows. 1. The resolution may be cited as a law reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operations number 4, Order Resolution 2018, and 2, the law reform zones of special operations, special security, and community development measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 4, Order 2018, is hereby affirmed. Mr. Speaker, I beg to give further notice that at a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the
questions and answers.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to give notice at the next meeting of the House. I'll move the following resolution. Given the challenges that the Solid Waste Management Authority has to keep Jamaica clean, be it resolved that responsibility for public cleansing be reverted to the municipal corporations.
Questions and answers. Questions.
Mr. Speaker,
Straight.
At the expiry of 21 days, I will ask the Honourable Prime Minister to answer the following questions in respect of his responsibility for energy and also in respect of his responsibility for the Heart Trust NTA.
Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sittings of the House. Motions for leave to introduce bills. Presentation of bills without leave of the House first obtained. Public business. Mr. Shemuda.
Mr. Speaker, we will commence with the Prime Minister making his contribution on the matters just enunciated, and also from then we will go to the conch export levy, rate of levy order 2018 resolution, which will be taken by the Minister of Industry, Commerce, Agriculture and Fisheries, and then we will end the session with the presentation of the matter standing in the name of the Minister of Technology, the Telecommunications Spectrum Regulation Fees Validation and Indemnity Act 2018. So, Mr. Speaker, I invite you to call on the Prime Minister to make his presentation.
Mr. Speaker, just before the PM, and that my colleague is aware of my continuing concern about the notice, because we're only advised today about the amendment, the resolution that the Prime Minister will be dealing with today in relation to Zozo. And again, for good order, I really would appreciate if we could be told the usual time, the day before at least, before our Parliament sitting.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I now move for the suspension of standing orders to enable me to take the motions, notice of which I gave earlier.
Those in favor? Those against? As are the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, so that we are clear on the order of proceedings. Today, we will seek to have extended 3 special measures initiatives. The first 2 being under the Zones of Special Operations legislation, Denham Town and Mount Salem. The reason for this being, Mr. Speaker, that we will be taking the parliamentary break in August, and these measures come to an end in early September and in August. And so, Mr. Speaker, I am asking the House to bear with us. Yes, it is a while off, but because of the break, we wouldn't want there to be any lapse in the operations. The final measure is the extension of the state of public emergency for the parish of St. James. That measure was already read in the record of Parliament 2 meetings ago, and we agreed then that we would take them at a later meeting, which that later meeting being today. So, Mr. Speaker, I will start by first seeking the approval of the House for the Mount Salem and Denham Town zones of special operations, and then we will debate afterwards the resolution which is already on the order paper for the extension of the state of emergency for the parish of St. James. Mr. Speaker, it is an honor to report to the Parliament that we are making significant progress with crime reduction in some communities. And it is gratifying to report that there are growing assurances of the permanency of peace which the residents of these affected communities have been perennially yearning. That peace, Mr. Speaker, is also having a positive impact on the entire country. Mr. Speaker, we only need to look back to the activities in the corresponding periods of 2017, when many of these communities experienced record cases of murders and serious crimes, which created menacing conditions for too many Jamaicans. Mr. Speaker, we continue to engage in and consider a number of special security measures. To a large extent, these have had promising results. Nevertheless, we also accept that despite the best intentions of the government, these interventions will fail in the absence of cooperation and harmony of purpose. Mr. Speaker, we must, in this honorable House, act in unison on matters of crime reduction and public safety and guard these positive early results. Mr. Speaker, in keeping with the spirit of coordination and cooperation, I am asking this honorable House, Mr. Speaker, to unite in approving the extensions of the zones of special operations in the communities of Mount Salem and Denham Town. And later on, I will renew the appeal for unity of purpose, that we unite in extending the state of public emergency for St. James.
Oh, your unity, stop. Oh, your unity, just stop at this. Sorry, go on.
I don't mind if you unite for everything. That's great.
But unite with corruption. But you're not uniting.
No, we're doing what we have to do in the interest of the people. So it is in the interest of the people that this House unite to support the extension. Mr. Speaker, today, as I said before, I'll be asking members of this honorable House to approve further extension of the Denham Town Zone of Special Operation, which will expire on the 16th of August 2018, when we will be on break. The Zone of Special Operations in Mount Salem, which expires on September the 4th, when we would probably still be on break or just about to return. And later on, we will debate the state of emergency, which comes to an end on the 2nd of August in St. James. Mr. Speaker, following the passage of the law reform, Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017, we have successfully commenced the work that was necessary to transform these two communities. Since that time, both zones have signaled a turning point in terms of the impact of focused special measures in defined spaces. This is because fundamentally the effort has equally combined security and social intervention in the formula to achieve meaningful and sustainable change. Most importantly, the effort has mandated and has received the support of the residents of the communities. They, Mr. Speaker, are the primary beneficiaries and indeed the primary stakeholders. And you know, Mr. Speaker, if the residents of St. James, in particular those of Mount Salem, and if the residents of Denham Town were able to sit in this house, Mr. Speaker, there would be no question about what their votes would be. There would be no question. And though we understand clearly, Mr. Speaker, that parliamentarians are not ambassadors for their constituents, that was well established. Well, you know, an English political philosopher opined, Mr. Speaker, that parliamentarians sit not merely as ambassadors, but they sit representing in their own right elected. So they can, and oftentimes do, vote against the wishes, the views of their constituency. Not that they should, but they can, and oftentimes have. So, Mr. Speaker, the point I am making is that in this regard, I want the MPs to vote as ambassadors of their constituents. But point well made. Because, Mr. Speaker, on that side, it would, by virtue of statements made publicly, it would seem as if that side does not intend to be faithful to the principle which they seem to now want to espouse, that they are ambassadors of the people's will. So we will test that principle, Mr. Speaker, later on today, when we come to debate the extension of the state of emergency in St. James. Oh, okay. Good. Didn't know that. Very, very good to hear. Well, in that case, Mr. Speaker, I could just take my seat and put the vote. We could.
But we will talk. We will talk.
Mr. Speaker, in previous addresses, the government has noted the impact of the security efforts during the clear and hold phases, and has noted that the work that has commenced with respect to social intervention in the build phase has also been effective. The aim of the bill phase is to ensure the effective implementation of community redevelopment, citizen security, and public safety initiatives, which are significantly transforming vulnerable and volatile communities. For this reason, we accepted from the onset that the last phase of the strategy, which is the bill phase, could only be considered, Mr. Speaker, as the beginning of a much longer process of transformation. We continue, therefore, to underscore that while the Law Reform, Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures Act 2017 has placed a specific time frame with allowances for extension for the achievement of defined objectives, there is no short-term vision in pursuing success. Instead, to ensure transformation in these spaces, there must be a realistic and practical approach, Mr. Speaker, towards transitioning these communities to sustainable peace. To date, community crime prevention programs and strategies continue to bring order to both communities. And this includes changes and improvements in community infrastructure, culture, and the physical environment. The approaches that we have used, Mr. Speaker, combines various agencies of government, the church and faith-based institutions, civil society, the private sector, local government, to bring to bear the combined effort on improving these communities, to improve order in the lives of the people. The programs in the zones have been assessed as being effective, and there is no reason, Mr. Speaker, to discontinue the work being done. As a point of fact, there are overall reductions in homicides, and particularly firearm-related incidents. Further to this, we continue to convene various interagency working groups, which includes law enforcement, service providers, and community-based practitioners, to ensure that our efforts are deliberate and transparent while we seek to manage the transformation of these communities. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with Section 6 of the Act, I am required to provide to the House a report on the progress made in each of the zones. Mr. Speaker, this can take up significant time of the House. So what I've decided to do, Mr. Speaker, is to table the details of the progress of the communities in a ministry paper, which members at their leisure can review and which is there for the press to review as well. Mr. Speaker, we continue to make significant improvements in both communities, Mount Salem and Denham Town, in road improvement and rehabilitation. I'm certain that both members of Parliament can attest to the improvements that are taking place in their communities as it relates to road improvements. Mr. Speaker, the regularization of utilities continues. Drain cleaning and the removal of solid waste, Mr. Speaker. This is continuing, and in fact, we have developed a system of environmental wardens. And I'm certain that if any of us found the time to visit either Denham Town or Mount Salem, you would testify that these communities are much cleaner than they were before. Mr. Speaker, we have set up block making projects. We have a back-to-school support program. We have parenting support programs, various community outreach. Mr. Speaker, the one that I'm pleased about the most is the increase in opportunities for employment, particularly in Mount Salem. Mr. Speaker, anecdotally, I was brought up to date that a certain BPO operation was seeking 400 persons to be employed. And one of the places that they went to fill that need was Mount Salem, because obviously, Mr. Speaker, Mount Salem had the programs to prepare the people for employment. Mr. Speaker, I am particularly pleased as well that as a result of these zones of special operations, the citizens of both Mount Salem and Denham Town are now not just Jamaicans by virtue of being born here, but they are Jamaicans with papers. They have their identification cards. They are now formally recognized and known by the state. Mr. Speaker, there are entrepreneurship and business development programs in these areas. So, Mr. Speaker.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, we have, particularly in Denham Town, school-wide behavior modification programs. There is a summer camp there now, Mr. Speaker, and we have a skills training program going there now. Well, Mr. Speaker, I thought I would bring to the House, while I have the attention of the House and indeed the nation. When we structured the law around the zones of special operations, we put in place what we call an accountability framework. And that accountability framework mandated that the National Security Council receives a 10-day report on the operations of the joint forces in the area. So every 2 weeks, I get a detailed report on the human resources used in the area, the operations conducted, and the results of the operations, and a projection as to what is likely to happen in the 10 days to come. And it is interesting to analyze what has happened in these communities over the period of time that the zones are in place. In Mount Salem, we started out discovering weapons, interdicting wanted persons, and then it phased out to dealing with interpersonal conflicts, stone throwing, knife wounding. And I can say that looking at the reports for Mount Salem, we have actually transitioned out of that phase. So you're no longer getting these kinds of violent expressions. There are still some public order issues, but clearly not at the level of violence. In Denham Town, which has not had as long a period and had a period where we broke literally the needed presence, we are still seeing expressions of violence which are cause for concern. We're not seeing shootings or the discovery of weapons, but people are still seeking to resolve their conflicts with knives and machetes, some cases of acid throwing. So the presence of the security forces and the controlled area does help, but we should not for 1 minute believe that the propensity to commit violence still does not exist. And it is not just within the zone that there is the propensity for violence, but even outside the zone, where, Mr. Speaker, members would recall that when we transitioned early from the hold phase to the build phase and drew down the troop postings, that there were attacks coming from outside of Denham Town, which resulted in residents of Denham Town losing their lives. The situation there, Mr. Speaker, is still one that is of grave concern. And there should not be, at this time, any consideration of ending the zones of special operations. Mr. Speaker, Denham Town and the environs, including Tivoli Gardens and West Kingston generally, have had this sort of intervention before. At least twice I can recall. Mr. Speaker, after these interventions ended, we ended up back at the same place, where violence was still a feature. There was still shootings contributing to a high murder rate. In other words, Mr. Speaker, those interventions which saw static police presence in these West Kingston communities at that time did not result in a permanent transformation of those communities. It is not the intention this time, Mr. Speaker, for the government to make the investment in securing these communities and not come away assured that we have once and for all fundamentally transformed those communities. Mr. Speaker, I don't think I need to go further in asking the Parliament to approve the extension of these two zones for an additional 60 days. I therefore, Mr. Speaker, place the question to the House. Well, that is your job, Mr. Speaker, but I ask the House to consider favorably the extension.
Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have been here before. This is the third round of dealing with the matter. No, it's okay. First, another extension, and another no. The issues we raised then remain the same. Let me say at the outset, we will support the extension in the Zozo, the two areas before us. But Mr. Speaker, through you, Mr. Prime Minister, you started out your presentation emphasizing much on cooperation. Mr. Prime Minister, we are willing to cooperate for the benefit of Jamaica and Jamaicans anytime and every time. But, Mr. Prime Minister, you have to allow us to cooperate with you. In the instant case, as the House Leader raised, these dates for the renewal of the Zozo didn't fall out of the sky. We knew they were going to expire at a certain time. You must have been doing your assessment coming up throughout the 60-day period to determine if you will need an extension or not. And you would have done that on the basis of data over the period that it has been in force. And you would be able to provide that to the opposition for our own assessment and analysis to inform a position going forward. That is not before us, Mr. Speaker. And that's when we raise the argument about the lack of cooperation or sincerity about cooperation. This is the evidence. It's not an opinion I'm putting forward. This is the fact.
We ask for information way in advance. We don't get it. And yet the Prime Minister will come here and say, we want cooperation. We want to work together. Those words, Mr. Speaker, ring hollow. And Jamaica and Jamaicans are the ones that would pay the price for it. Mr. Speaker, I've said before in previous debates on the Zozo extension, yes, accept what you have said regarding the circumstance that prevail that justifies a Zozo. What about those areas with similar features? High levels of murder, high levels of shooting, prevalence of gangs and gang activities, etc., etc. What are the strategies to control that situation so that a Zozo does not become necessary in those areas? Mr. Speaker, up to now we get no response to that. Those are the things we would like to cooperate with the government on. Mr. Speaker, crime reduction cannot be a one-off exercise. It must be a deliberate intervention that is sustainable, and the necessary policies and the necessary programs put in place to achieve that. We want to save lives, and more importantly, we want the Jamaican people to have a sense of safety and security in their homes, in the public spaces, anywhere in Jamaica. But it's not going to happen by some feel-good activities. What happens after Zozo? What happens in the other areas? And if you look at the crime stats, Mr. Speaker, both where the Zozos are and where the state of emergency. In fact, in the case of St. James, it's a double between the state of emergency and the Zozo. If you look at the rest of the parishes throughout the country, the numbers are not very encouraging. Significant reduction in St. James, which includes Mount Salem. And we welcome that. Less lives lost, greater sense of security. But what do you give up in return? And can you achieve those results otherwise? And I'll speak to that state of emergency and those issues later on. But so far as the state of the Zozo is concerned, Mr. Prime Minister, you speak much about the social intervention. And fine, we cannot and we will not oppose those kinds of intervention and the successes which are achieved. But Mr. Prime Minister, back to school assistance, I do it in my constituency every year and there's no Zozo. I deal with other social problems in the communities and there's no Zozo. So to say that to achieve these things, the prerequisite for it is a Zozo, is an argument that, we have a challenge with. We welcome the results. Don't get the impression that we have any issue with them. But don't give the impression that in order to get them, you need to have a Zozo. That's our argument. Because we need to have those social intervention in South St. Andrew, Police Division, and West Kingston. High levels of murders and shootings. Where is the Zozo in those areas? Where's the Zozo intervention in those non-Zozo areas?
South St. Andrew.
So, Mr. Prime Minister, these pluses that you speak of, we welcome them, but we need a lot more. And I want to close by saying, the security of our people cannot be a one-off, short-term intervention. It has to be a long-term, sustainable intervention. And we are awaiting those medium, long-term interventions that can give us a sense of comfort that we are not only going to be safe today, we're going to be safe tomorrow and indefinitely going into the future. Mr. Speaker, the opposition offers no objection to the proposal for the extension of the Zozo before us.
Mr. Speaker.
Order, please. Mr. Daly.
I'm here for a long time, yeah? I've been here longer than you. Yeah?
Dali.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Please.
Mr. Speaker, the opposition spokesman on national security has already indicated that the opposition will be supporting the extension. And I listened carefully, as I always do, to the presentation of the Most Honorable Prime Minister. A couple of things as a member of Parliament struck me from the presentation from the PM. And one of the things that I would like to urge the Prime Minister and the government side to do is at some point in time, very soon, bring to the House what has been the expenditure, the financial expenditure on this Zozo that has been operating from January. If the House cannot be brought up to date, before Zozo was before January, the state of emergency was January, right? And you have had the support of the opposition from the first implementation of the Zozo. And the House and the country cannot hear that this is what we have spent so far in maintaining the peace and social cohesion in these two areas of Jamaica that have flared up so bad. We have not been able to get a feedback and to question the security forces on issues that members of Parliament have and would like to talk to the security forces, because the committee of the House that is supposed to deal with those things, the internal and external committee, those committees have not been formed. And I'm appealing to you, Prime Minister, when we get back off the recess, let's put the committees in place. Certainly there are members on this side that would like to sit in camera without the press, with the security forces, to ask them some serious questions. When I hear the report that says we have had a summer camp for Mount Salem, come on, man. I understand you. When I see the pictures of some young, we are happy for these things, you know. But I have asked the question from day one: do you need a Zozo to have social intervention? The answer is no. Well, hold on. So if you're not firing gunshots and killing people, you won't have birth certificates, and you won't have summer camp and NIS cards and TRN registration and IDs? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet, and while we are supporting the extension, the 60 days extension, I want to urge the government. The police have been stretched all along. In Clarendon, when the last extension was asked for, I got up and I said, we need an intervention in Clarendon. We need more mobility for the police in Clarendon. Farm and Hepworthville was under siege in Clarendon, in central Clarendon and other parts of Clarendon, and nothing was done. No operations were carried out in Clarendon, special operations. I am not aware of any. Well, maybe there are quiet operations. Quiet operations, I am not aware. I am not aware. Quiet operations, I am not aware. The mobility of the police in Clarendon from Croftshill to Frankfield, all over, is in serious deficit. Serious deficit. The police in these areas, Mr. Minister and Prime Minister, are stretched. When I heard the report from the superintendent in East Kingston on Sunday, when they were pinned down by gunmen in Jarrett Lane and Saunders Avenue for 2 hours, and have to call out Bull Bay and all the other sections of Kingston to deal with East Kingston problem, I say to myself, how much more can our policemen bear and women bear? And up to now, we have not even settled their wage negotiation. up to now. So there are some. I did 3 rounds of successful negotiations with the police. 3 rounds. 3 rounds of successful wage negotiations with the policemen and women. All categories of public sector workers. I don't want to have a conflict, but I'm saying you don't need to have the thing about we have achieved all of these things because of the Zozo. This is what government must do, intervene in social intervention. This is what government must do normally. I am a member of parliament. I have a summer camp for 25 years. This year is the 26 years of North Clarendon summer camp for 300 young people, residential for three weeks. I know I'm not Zozo and a gunshot of fire. Social intervention for people, for their passport, for their TRN, bring up the Ministry of Social Security to register them for NIS, bring in passport office. These are normal things that an active member of parliament do without Zozo. So while we support it, I'm saying the basis of the argument is fundamentally flawed, that because of the Zozo, these things are happening. It is flawed. Let us say murder is down. I agree, and we are happy. Every well-thinking Jamaican is happy to know that murder rate is down in Mount Salem zone. Every well-thinking Jamaican, but murder rate is going up elsewhere. We are happy for it. But I'm saying, Prime Minister, there are some things that we need to settle. We want to have the committees of the House, especially the internal and external committee, so that members of parliament can sit with the security forces, their leadership, make proposals to them and hear from them. And we would like to know at the earliest what has been the expenditure on the zones of special operations so far. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Dr. Chang.
Mr. Speaker,
Dr. Chang.
I think I have to make a few comments in response to comments
Chang,
from
make sure your
my colleague.
Make sure your mics are working,
yeah,
please.
They are working. On the side. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I was in the House when the member referred to Clarendon, as well as I had several comments, requests from my colleague in the Maple area, which is the central part of Clarendon, a number of the other MPs in Clarendon. The mobile reserve was dispatched to Clarendon. Been there now some 3 weeks, and a contingent of the Jamaica Defence Force. In terms of the mobility of the forces, we have acquired additional vehicles which are effective, 19 pickups, which a number of those will be assigned to Clarendon this week. Yes, pickups had to be ordered, and in acquiring new pickups, it takes a lead about 7 months. There were 19 pickups in the island, and we acquired those 19 pickups, and they are being distributed this week there. But additional contingents were sent to Clarendon, and in fact, they have had some effect, significant effect in reducing the level of violence, but there's still issues out there which have to be dealt with at this point in time. And I must comment, Mr. Speaker, that the report on social activity in the areas of zones of special operation must not be misrepresented. There are many areas in Jamaica which have socio-economic challenges. In fact, it is the previous and early administration defined under the community renewal program 100 communities that had vulnerabilities and challenges that need to be dealt with in a very focused and special way. Services that refer to such as back to school and other social services, public health care are regular activities throughout the country. But based on analysis and statistics by the Planning Institute, it was determined that some 100 communities, including a number of rural Jamaica across the country, were particularly vulnerable. And it is important that the government begin to take some steps in activating more comprehensive activities in these areas. Within that context, there are about 20 to 22 communities which are particularly vulnerable, volatile and vulnerable. And it is those areas that are particularly looked at for activities like the Zozo. We cannot do all, the government cannot do all of them at one time. They are identified, and then the Prime Minister, through his action and the available budget, will take steps to intervene in all of them. And in fact, while Zozo has demonstrated the kind of activity, working is going on in several. The Jamaica social investment is focused on some 50 communities, including these areas. And CSJP is working in about 40 of them. Those work are going on. The factories, places like Anchovy in St. James, in South St. James, where JSF is working. The airlines South Savamar in Russia, Granville, in Majesty Gardens. Work is being done in Denham Town, in Hannah Town. So I don't think the impression must be given, that intervention in volatile, vulnerable communities is confined to 2 Zozos. That is not correct. Right? The government has identified the communities, is allocating funding, and is moving to ensure that significant work in a holistic manner is done to bring about significant transformation activity in these communities. And in fact, the program will proceed. So, Mr. Speaker, I think I ought to indicate that, because the record must be set straight in terms of the activity of this government in relation to volatile, vulnerable communities throughout Jamaica.
Mr. Speaker,
Dr.
I am as well. Mr. Speaker, I am extremely pleased to have heard the Minister confirm the point being made by the member from Clarendon in terms of the fact that social intervention needs to be done and has been going on, and that it does not need Zozo to make it happen. In fact, as the Minister was speaking, one of the things that came to me is that we definitely need to look at a comparison of the budget under JSIF, for example, those communities that have JSIF and those that have Zozo, to see, that's the point, but to see how much is being spent in one. Once we claim success, we want to be able to replicate that success. If we have 100 vulnerable communities that have been identified, and 2 areas have been specially chosen to put Zozo, then no, I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting anything else except the fact that 2 areas have Zozo operating. You have made the point about how important social intervention is, and therefore it would be good for us to be able to compare the kind of budget that we're spending in respect of the social interventions under Zozo and the kind of budget that we also have available in these other communities where JSIF is implementing social intervention program. It is important because we want to understand the scale at which the intervention needs to be made to have the kind of success that you're talking about. Because sometimes if you're only doing a minute intervention, then it will not have the impact that we are expecting. And we would want to make sure that we can benefit from the kind of impact in the same way as those being undertaken in the 2 areas where we actually have the Zozo. You know, when we look at the Zozo as well, and the point was made, and I think we should not ignore it, that often, and we understand why, right? Often, you need elevated crime to get those kinds of social intervention. So if you're not fire shot, you're not going to get it. And it doesn't mean that there are not areas where that is not happening, where we need it. We need to also look at the message we are sending. Whether or not communities that have social issues that need attention will only get it if man are fire shot. Because that is a serious, serious question. Because if that is so, I don't have to tell anybody what to do then to attract that kind of intervention. And I don't think that that could be the message that we would want to send. I have some also other serious, serious concerns when it comes to the conditions of our officers that are out there. Yes, that are out there. I'm not sure how many officers we have operating in these areas in terms of Zozo. I know that where the state of emergency is concerned, we're talking about between 90 and 120 officers per day that's talking about what, 600, 700 individuals who are there. When you take the rotation of the officers into consideration, what you're talking about is a large group of officers that are put in extreme stress continuously. I don't know, I've not heard it, Sorry about that. I did not hear it in the report, but I believe that it is extremely important for us to have a better understanding. One of the conditions under which our officers are working, the member from Clarendon spoke about the salary and incentives issue in terms of our officers. We need to remember that these are not machines that are out there working. These are people. These are individuals with families, with spouses, with children that they are also concerned about while they're out there on the firing line, keeping us safe. So I'm extremely concerned about that. I'm going to reserve some of my other comments as it relates to that for when we get to the state of emergency.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no questions were really asked except an invitation to provide the funding data. And I will admit, Mr. Speaker, this is a question that has been asked over and over again. With the addition now of the empaneling of the internal and external committee to review it, Mr. Speaker, I'm very cautious about giving security data. I think there is a place where it can be shared and will be shared at the National Security Council, where there is a member there. Mr. Speaker, I don't want to start a new debate. I don't want to start a new debate. But, Mr. Speaker, that is, I believe, the appropriate body to examine sensitive information. Information that is not sensitive, Mr. Speaker, can be provided. But when the information is sensitive, then I think the Security Council ought to be the area. Mr. Speaker, critical point to note on the issue of funding. Just today, the Minister of Foreign Affairs signed 2 grants from the European Union. One of them to assist with rural development and agriculture for a grant for $15 million US, 15 million US euro. Important correction. 15 million euros. And a second grant to deal with community development and citizen security for 20 million euros. I want to take the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, to thank the European Union, in particular the Ambassador Vasilevska, who is a great friend of Jamaica. You would recall as well, Mr. Speaker, that the Director General, Mr. Manservisi, visited Jamaica, I believe it was earlier this year, and we took him on a tour of the Denham Town Zone of Special Operations and gave him a very good understanding of what the government's policy is as it relates to citizen security and community development. He was able, Mr. Speaker, to see firsthand the interventions that were necessary to rescue communities. I want to challenge the position being raised by members of the opposition to suggest that there is no need for zones of special operations because we are doing all these interventions on our own anyway. That we are giving out book vouchers and keeping back-to-school treats and keeping summer camps. We don't need zones of special operations.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker. No business. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You did it to my leader. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister is misleading the House in terms of the points that have been made. I believe that it is disingenuous of him, and I believe that it is beneath his position as Prime Minister to be doing that.
That's why you get book Prime Minister.
Well then, Mr. Speaker, let me make my comments without attaching them to the comments of the opposition. So then there would be no intention of misleading. So my comment would therefore be, Mr. Speaker, that there are some communities where it is not possible for these kinds of social interventions to be executed without the persistent presence of the security forces. Mr. Speaker, the more I listen to the debates, and not just in this House, but generally, there is a sense that people would want to imagine that, we can apply traditional strategies universally across the board to various communities, expecting that there will be results. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that we have tried these conventional strategies before, and we have seen the murder rate continue to rise. Mr. Speaker, Jamaicans have to come to the understanding that no matter what the strategies we put in place, at the core of them must be security. There are some communities, Mr. Speaker, where thankfully citizen security is a reality, meaning that these communities have high levels of employment, their parents are active in the lives of their children and in their schools function, they have good citizens cooperation, and they have political representatives that work, and there are many communities like that across Jamaica. Indeed, I would like to think that most of our communities are like that. But there are, Mr. Speaker, a significant number of communities in which all the elements that would create that sense of security, those elements are absent. They are absent. And regular policing, Mr. Speaker, cannot be of any effect in those communities because the fundamental elements for safety and security, for citizen security, is not there. These communities, Mr. Speaker, do not have peace as other communities have. They don't have citizens that own the peace, that can get up and stand up in their community and say, I don't like what is happening in my community, without fear that somebody is going to attack them. So, Mr. Speaker, the intervention of the government is not merely to come with, here is a back-to-school treat, or here is support for parenting. We also have to come with the security to create the space in which the citizens can stand up and reclaim their community. Mr. Speaker, the breakdown in our communities did not happen overnight. It is something that took place over decades, from a breakdown in our standing principles of the society, breakdown in our families, breakdown in our political standards, breakdown in our police force. Over many decades, it is not going to happen overnight that we reverse this. And until this House, Mr. Speaker, gets to the point where we accept that we are now at the point where there is a program to start the process of reversing this creeping destruction of the Jamaican standards and rebuilding these standards in our communities, Mr. Speaker, then we will lose this very precious opportunity that we now have of reclaiming these communities. So, Mr. Speaker, I am appreciative of the support of the opposition in extending the zones of special operations, and I can appreciate the concerns about cost, and those, Mr. Speaker, at an appropriate time and through an appropriate organ will be addressed. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I am going to ask that we put both for the approval of the House. And so I'm going to take a vote on both. Those in favor? Aye. Those opposed? The ayes have it. Both motions are carried.
Mr. Speaker, the next item will be the telecommunications spectrum regulations.
You want to do the SOE? Okay, let's do it. Let's do the SOE. Let's do the SOE.
All right. Mr. Speaker, wait, hold on.
SOE, so I'll go on to state of emergency. So what we do is this. Yeah. So this is the emergency policy.
All right, Mr. Speaker, of the three matters put to the House by the Prime Minister, we will now take the emergency powers continuance number 3, resolution 2018.
Prime Minister, we have to start with you.
Paper. Mr. Speaker, I now move to debate the motion which was placed on the order paper, read into our records 2 weeks ago, and that is for the extension of the state of public emergency for St. James. Slide. Mr. Speaker, I wish to draw the House's attention to some statistics which I thought important to share with the House. In our last debate, the request was that we bring statistics to the House to show the effectiveness of the state of public emergency. Mr. Speaker, the slide depicts the murder statistics for St. James year to date, that is 2018-2017, and full year figures are also shown in blue. In 2017, the parish of St. James accounted for approximately 336 murders and 255 shootings, the majority of which occurred within traditional hotspots. These acts of violence sometimes resulted in the murder or injury of innocent bystanders. Mr. Speaker, this figure equates to a murder rate of 182 per 100,000, which, if St. James were a country, would make it the most murderous country in the world. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, St. James is about the population of Barbados. About the population of Barbados. The country with the highest murder rate is El Salvador, with a rate of 109 murders per 100,000 population. followed by Honduras with 64 per 100,000. And of course, by virtue of last year's murder figures, Jamaica was somewhere in the region of about 50. So by way of contrast, Mr. Speaker, as I said, Barbados, with a population which is not vastly different from that of St. James. Barbados is about 200,000 people. St. James about 188,000 persons. Barbados' murder rate was less than 11 murders per 100,000. So the murder rate in St. James for 2017 was the highest ever recorded murder rate for any single police division. So I want it to be understood, Mr. Speaker, that St. James in Jamaica, in the region, by virtue of its murder rate, was exceptional. We had a real serious problem, crisis in St. James. Mr. Speaker, it was for this reason that a state of public emergency was declared for the parish of St. James on the 18th of January 2018. An initial extension of 3 months was granted and concluded on the 2nd day of May 2018, while a second was approved following that period, which will expire on the 2nd of August 2018. Mr. Speaker, largely as a credit to the efforts of the state of emergency for the period of January 1 to July 7th, 2018, the division accounted for 51 murders. And this is up to the 7th of July. I believe it is about 54 now. Well, the Minister of National Security will give you the figures up to yesterday. This is up to the 7th when I had actually prepared this script, which reflects a 67% decrease in murders when compared to the corresponding period in 2017. While some criminals, and all of that, of course, is reflected in the slide, and we will make copies of the slides available to the media. Now, while some criminals have continued to commit random acts of violence, actions of the security forces have had significant impact on reducing the opportunities for gangs to engage in criminality and to move freely within the space. Additionally, cases are being developed to capture more wanted persons and to identify and target financiers and main facilitators. Mr. Speaker, up to the 30th of June 2018, 2,729 persons were detained in St. James. Slide. $175 were charged for various crimes. 25 for robbery, 27 for shooting with intent, 13, sorry, it was 25 for murders, forgive me. 13 for robbery, 10 for rape, 28 for other sexual offenses, and 72 other charges. 20 persons have been detained or charged as gang leaders or members of gangs. Mr. Speaker, 46 illegal weapons were recovered, and many of these were directly linked to gang leaders and members. It is important that we place this number in context. A platoon of JDF soldiers, Mr. Speaker, is 30. That makes up a platoon. And if you look at what we have recovered, you would have enough weapons there to arm a platoon. But that is not so much the concern. The concern is that on our streets, you have fully automatic military-grade weapons. 5 AK-47s, 5 M16s, 1 SKS rifle, 1 submachine gun recovered. And in the pistols, many of them are automatic, fully automatic pistols. So, Mr. Speaker, taking off 46 weapons out of the parish of St. James has gone a significant way in disarming the criminal gangs. But let us not in any way, Mr. Speaker, believe that this is significant relative to what is still out there. Mr. Speaker, the St. James state of emergency remains effective. As recent as Friday, the 13th of July, 2018, a significant person of interest was intercepted and arrested at a checkpoint in St. James. This person, Mr. Speaker, was trying to leave the parish, obviously under disguise. But the keen eyes of those manning the checkpoint, they were able to nab him. Mr. Speaker, I want to join with the other members who have pointed out that our security forces place themselves at risk every day. They are literally on the firing line. Very important that it be said, Mr. Speaker, because within the boundaries of the St. Catherine North state of emergency, last week, an off-duty private of the Jamaica Defense Force in St. Catherine North, it is reported, was visiting friends, relatives in an area. And criminal gunmen, well, there's no difference between a criminal and a gunman. But gunmen accosted him. He wrestled with them, managed to take away one of their firearms, but he was unfortunately shot and killed. No doubt his intervention saved the lives of his friends. It was a heart-wrenching story to be told to me, Mr. Speaker, because this young man obviously took his job seriously, even being off duty, to defend the lives of innocent citizens, giving up his own. There are lessons to be learned from this, Mr. Speaker, that even within the state of emergency, we should never be lulled into feeling that the criminals will not seek to commit their gruesome acts. Even the presence of the state of emergency will not deter some of our criminals. The point of fact is, Mr. Speaker, that the report I received is that there was a joint patrol that passed the way of that off-duty soldier. And they even spoke to him and said to him, you have to leave this area soon because the criminals are themselves doing their patrols. And so true it was, because those same criminals were committing a robbery in close proximity and observing the movements of the JDF and police patrols. And as soon as they left the area, they came and accosted this soldier. So, Mr. Speaker, the lesson from this is that as we sit in this House and we look at the numbers going down, I want every member to appreciate that the threat still exists. The threat still exists. And so, Mr. Speaker, regardless of the other issues that were raised about closing times and traffic inconvenience, if we are to make a serious impact on crime, we have to break our minds towards a long-term strategy. Mr. Speaker, I now want to play a video which shows a cache of weapons that are still in the hands of gangs out there in Montego Bay. This is reputedly coming from one of the notorious gangs, and I'm not going to give them any more infamy or notoriety by calling their names. But these are weapons that they are claiming that they have recently brought in, suggesting that the weapons that we have found and confiscated are being replaced. Well, I have a message for them, Mr. Speaker. We will find those as we have found others. And they do it deliberately, Mr. Speaker, to send a message to show that they are well organized, they are well funded, and that they can challenge the state. But we will not allow it, Mr. Speaker. We will not allow it. I want to point out to the membership of this House that the men who killed the JDF soldier, no stone was left unturned. And we found them, and they are now in police custody to face the courts. Mr. Speaker, in what we just watched, I want to highlight the barrel-shaped magazine. You may not have been noticing it. It's to your right. It's with one of the small handguns. That is the round barrel clip that carries 50 rounds of ammunition for a handgun. And for the M16s, those carry 100 rounds. And before the state of emergency, and I'm now getting reports that this is emerging again as a feature, that the criminals would display their armory and their strength by just firing wildly at nights, exchanging bullets to put the communities in great fear. Mr. Speaker, we will not allow these things to continue in our country. We will not allow it. Mr. Speaker, thankfully, since the state of emergency, we have not had many reports of this kind of activity. But if we were to find ourselves thinking that it is now convenient to pull up stumps, it is very easy for these kinds of activities to return. So I urge members to focus our minds on staying the long game, because the criminals feel that, like everything else that we have done as government, we don't have the discipline and the commitment to stay the long game. Mr. Speaker, when we started the state of public emergency, we knew it was risky. We knew that it would have had an impact on tourism. But we took a calculated risk, and we said we would have to manage these extraordinary powers in such a way that it becomes a credit to Jamaica. Even in the apprehension of the criminals who killed that soldier, our police force and our military acted with dignity. They didn't bring themselves down to the level of the criminals. They conducted their investigations and did their apprehensions within and in exemplification of the law. And that's a powerful point, Mr. Speaker, because too often people look at countries like Jamaica as if to say we are careless with the law. But I believe that the way in which we have conducted ourselves with the zones of special operations and so far with the state of emergency, we have taken great care with the powers that these special laws give to the security forces. So, Mr. Speaker, tourists who come here say, what state of emergency? They say they have never felt safer before. I mean, our Jamaicans are saying that, but I'm just making the point that we took a calculated risk, and now we can use our security operations as a selling point for the evolution of Jamaica. And that is something that both sides of the House can be proud of. And we must commend our policemen and women and our soldiers that they are doing us proud in the way they have used the extraordinary powers given to them. You know, Mr. Speaker, I had a long discourse at National Security Council meeting about violence and force. For too long in Jamaica, we have confused the use of force with violence. So when people hear the Jamaica Constabulary Force, the next association is violence. When they hear about the army, the next association is some form of violence. And we have had a long conversation which has filtered down to the leadership of the forces, that we must use force without violence. That our security forces will inevitably need to act with force, but it doesn't mean that you have to use violence. Mr. Speaker, the Commissioner reported to me, and I share it without asking his permission, but I'm sure he wouldn't mind. He said that he received a call from one of his operation heads to say, Commissioner, we just conducted an operation. We use force, but no violence. And he laughed because he said, the message is getting through. Your credit as a policeman and as a soldier is not going to be the level of violence you use, but how smartly you have worked in following the law to apprehend the criminals. And more you are seeing the security force acting that way in doing investigations and bringing to the courts criminal gangs, taking down whole criminal gangs. So the transformation, Mr. Speaker, is happening before our eyes. We are not there yet. Clearly we're not there yet. But we are seeing the elements of it creeping in. And once we continue on this path, Mr. Speaker, with the support of the opposition, it is only Jamaica that will benefit from these operations. Mr. Speaker, I have to say something about Reggae Sumfest and the need for greater consideration and discernment in the application of the emergency powers. I've heard the complaints and concerns raised by the members from St. Catherine who did not support the extension of the North St. Catherine state of public emergency. And we have had discussions, and I'm sure the Minister of National Security will say something about the commanders giving new times and administration of the emergency powers to bring them in line with what exists in Montego Bay. So, Mr. Speaker, there should be some improvement. I'm not going to use the term relaxation, but there should be some improvement and increased consideration of the concerns of the citizens of North St. Catherine. Mr. Speaker, as it relates to Montego Bay and the Sumfest Music Festival, which I believe is now almost, more than 25 years old. That's a major part. This is its 25th staging. This is a major calendar event and a big event for reggae music as a festival. Mr. Speaker, we thought that it was necessary to declare a special zone within the St. James area, which would accommodate not just the people who are promoting Reggae Sumfest, but everyone who wants to enjoy the festival and everyone who earns a living from the festival. And I will allow the Minister of National Security to give further details on how that special zone within the zone of a special discretion, yes, a special district, forgive me, within the state of emergency. Mr. Speaker, the members on this side have said, on the side opposite, have said that the various special initiatives are working within the areas they are declared. And nobody debates that. But they make the point, a very difficult point to make, but they make it nonetheless, that outside of the zones, all hell is breaking loose. That there is mayhem all over. Not quite the case. Mr. Speaker, from time to time, communities will erupt. I hear the member from St. Andrew South pointing out that there are eruptions, and it seems as if the Rockfort area and we know that these areas have the potential. I hear the member from Clarendon pointing out that Maypen has erupted. Mr. Speaker, there is a strategic plan that is being rolled out. And one thing we will not do is to be led by the unplanned events. Because one thing we are clear on, Mr. Speaker, is that there are some criminal masterminds at play in Jamaica. That they will create alarm, they will create flare-ups as a distraction to do other things. So we will not, Mr. Speaker, be led by every single flare-up. We have a strategic plan in degrading and keeping pressure on some of these gangs which have tentacles right across Jamaica. And sometimes, Mr. Speaker, we know that they collaborate with other gangs to take the heat off themselves. So when we lay our plan, Mr. Speaker, we are not going to be distracted by what we are doing. Our plan is working. And Mr. Speaker, I don't talk too much about it, but you just have to go and examine the national murder rate and see what is happening there. The next time that I speak about that in any detail, Mr. Speaker, will be on the 1st of January 2019, when we see what the murder rate is versus this year. Well, as I said, I'm not going to start to talk about it, right? Because as I said, and I want the Parliament to appreciate this, there are criminal masterminds in Jamaica. Criminal masterminds who all they do is sit down and plan how to disrupt the government. And you're right, some of them are in prison doing that. So, Mr. Speaker, what I'm saying is that what the state of emergency has done is to limit their ability to move around their weapons and move around their criminal cronies. Hold on. But it has also given us the ability now, the space to make cases against them. And what we have been doing with that space, Mr. Speaker, you will start to see the evidence of it as to how many gangs and criminals we are bringing in. Not just detaining them, but bringing them in on solid cases and placing them before the courts. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to assure members that it is not just the ability to detain, but the state of emergency has given us incredible intelligence. It has given us good space in which to do investigations and convert intelligence into evidence. It has also, Mr. Speaker, given us operational space, because to conduct operations in some environments, Mr. Speaker, require that our police have these extraordinary powers. And we have used those extraordinary powers in operations not to harm citizens. So the issue of collateral damage during operation has not come up, because you are able to cordon, you are able to put areas under curfew, you are able to limit movements, and therefore the police have been able to conduct operations without necessarily placing citizens who are innocent to these operations at risk. So, Mr. Speaker, I would say that we are now at a tipping point. And if you look at the daily rate for murders nationally, because the argument is that it's only for St. James that the state of emergency has been effective. But if you look, and not selective, member, it's the fact. But if you look, you will see that at the point of the declaration of the state of emergency, the blue line shows across Jamaica, you'll see that the daily murders, the average daily murders, has fallen from, that's 4.65 to 3.44 nationally. So it is cumulative. So it's all the actions together. Now, what it means, so if you look at St. James has stabilized and just started to tip up. It fell and then it started to, so you can't say that it is just because of St. James. The point I want to make, yes, the point I want to make is that all the actions taken together have started to pull down the murder rates nationally. I'll close by saying this, members. Of all the gangs that we have, which you probably going close to about 800 gangs in the island, small, large, you have a few of them who are very well organized and connected and well financed. They have tentacles in almost every community across Jamaica. Not to mention their connections abroad. They are the ones that influence crime generally. they have their tentacles in the police force. So they get intelligence about operations even before they reach the point of maturity. They have connections not just in the United States, but they are well connected in places you wouldn't believe. In Costa Rica, in Panama, they have connections. I wouldn't even go to say where else. They bring money through Jamaica and guns to Jamaica. Mr. Speaker, those are the people who we must target. And when I'm speaking, the leader of the opposition, who was a Minister of National Security during the time of Operation Kingfish, would well understand what I'm saying. That the police force is in a really difficult position now by virtue